In 1999, the American Association of Pediatrics issued a policy statement on media education. It included a series of recommendations on what pediatricians should advise parents when it comes to things like television, video games, the internet, and so on. One of those recommendations was that pediatricians should urge parents to avoid television viewing for children under the age of 2. For parents and medical practitioners, there's a wide array of factors to consider. Things like how media can affect social play and interaction between the child and their parents, how it can disrupt sleep or lead to obesity. But one of those concerns is the impact that media consumption has on learning. In terms of their social, cognitive, and, what we're interested in here, linguistic development, it seems that young children just don't learn as well through video as they do in live social settings. This is what researchers call the video deficit. There's still a lot of debate around the video deficit, what it is and what causes it, but when you look at the literature reviews, overall it seems that the deficit is strongest when we're very young, say under about 2 or 3 years old, and then it decreases with age. For the very young, one of the main causes of the video deficit seems to be the social factor. It's a crude overstatement, but basically, for babies, it's social or bust. The importance of the social factor is reflected in how the AAP later revised its recommendations. In their 2016 policy statement, which is the one they still stand by today, they discouraged television and other forms of screen media for children under 18 months. But they carved out an exception for video chatting, think Skype, FaceTime, and the like. So they made an exception, but only for a kind of media use that is inherently social. When it comes to learning their native language, it's not enough for young children to just hear the language. What they hear needs to be embedded in a social context. Learn like a baby is a common trope in online language learning spaces, which makes sense, I suppose. After all, the language you're the most proficient in is usually going to be the one you learned the earliest in life. So it makes some amount of sense to turn to babies and young children to look for best practices, things we can seek to emulate in our own language learning. So if you're an adult and you want to learn a foreign language, and you want to learn it like a baby, presumably the last thing you're going to want to do is use recorded media. After all, it's so terribly inefficient for babies that it's medically discouraged. And yet, there's a wide array of methods and platforms out there that tell you to do just that. Some of them even tell you to do only that. As shorthand, we'll call these approaches CI methods, as in comprehensible input methods. They're closely or loosely inspired by the ideas of Stephen Krashen and his concept of comprehensible input, which, in his own words, is the idea that
we acquire language in one way and only one way, when we understand messages.
The core of these methods is to watch videos with some gradation in difficulty. You start with very simple content and gradually work your way up to content that is more difficult. The point isn't to criticize those methods. Plenty of people use them and are more than happy with the results they achieve. We're just going to use them as a foil. The point I want to make here is just that many of these platforms use the baby analogy to market their method. This is how babies learn. Except, of course, it's not. At least, not entirely. They're missing that key social factor. Just to be absolutely clear, I'm only talking about a subset of these methods. There are methods out there that rely on the concept of comprehensible input and do put it in a social context. I'm just talking about the ones that don't do that, and instead rely on recorded media. Another example where the analogy doesn't hold up all that well is when they tell you to delay speaking. They argue that in the beginning you shouldn't speak, you should only listen to the language. Babies consume a ton of input before they try to talk. And have you ever met a baby? The damn things won't shut up. They're constantly trying to engage and interact with the world around them. Again, the point isn't to argue against delaying speaking. The point is just that the way they're using the baby analogy doesn't hold up all that well. There may be plenty of good reasons to use one of these video-based CI methods or to delay speaking, but babies aren't one of them. I'm not sure why we get the baby analogy so wrong. Perhaps we're just so narrowly focused on our own subject matter, namely learning a language, that we miss the forest for the trees. To find a more apt use of the analogy, one that better fits with how babies behave and reflects the importance of the social factor, I had to step outside of language learning circles and into the realm of music education. I suppose sometimes good advice is found in unlikely places. Victor Wooten is a world-renowned bass player. Check that, is a world-renowned player. He's perhaps best known as the bass player for Bella Fleck and the Flecktones, but he's had a rich career working with a variety of artists. He has a number of solo albums of his own, and he's won 5 Grammy Awards. He's also a music teacher, and he's developed his own philosophy of music education, inspired not so much by the nerdy science side of things, but more by his own experience growing up in a musical family. In a nutshell, he argues that we should learn music the same way we learned our first language, and so he makes use of the analogy of a baby learning a language. But, as we'll see, what he takes from it is quite different from what most language learning content creators take away from it. So we're going to try to take the ideas Wooten took from language learning and applied to music, and apply them back to language learning. The specifics are nothing earth-shattering. They're things you've probably heard many times before, but the angle he approaches them with might be new to you. A short, bite-sized version of his ideas can be found in the TED video entitled Music as a Language. It's probably one of my favorite videos, one that encapsulates a lot of my own approach to learning a language. I'll talk about the main ideas, but I can only encourage you to go watch the full thing yourself. It's well worth the watch, if only to hear his fantastic rendition of Amazing Grace. But first I want to show you a brief snippet of another video that will illustrate a lot of Wooten's points. It's just a video of a family playing music together. It's 3 boys with their father playing the song Jobi Joba from the famous band their grandfather was in, the Gypsy Kings. That video is also well worth your time. It's good vibes all around, and it'll definitely put a smile on your face. But what you're going to see here is just the transition from verse to chorus. The 4-year-old in the middle is having a ball, and he starts belting out the chorus a little too soon. Enough that for a brief moment, it throws everyone off. Don't worry too much if you don't know anything about music. The thing to pay attention to is the social dynamics. Here goes. The first thing you probably noticed is that everybody's laughing. The kid made a mistake, but I mean, he's 4. Nobody's gonna get mad at him for that. In Music as a Language, Wooten says, quote, "You were a baby when you first started speaking. Even though you spoke the language incorrectly, you were allowed to make mistakes. The more mistakes you made, the more your parents smiled." Connected to this, he gives the following piece of advice, quote, "In the beginning, embrace mistakes instead of correcting them. Like a child playing air guitar, there are no wrong notes." The kid in the Jobi Joba video has a guitar, but he's not fretting the chords like everyone else, and he's strumming but not always at the same tempo as everyone else. If all you could hear was his playing, probably wouldn't sound all that good. But nobody cares about that. What's important is that he gets to play with everyone else and not worry about having to get everything right. He's free to be involved, even if he's making a ton of mistakes. That said, even if nobody's correcting him per se, he is still getting feedback. Colloquially, when we use the word correction, we're usually thinking of some kind of explicit correction. Like, you make a mistake and somebody says, "No, that's not it. This is how you're supposed to do it." That's one way to provide feedback, but it's not the only way. If you watch the full video, you'll see how the father jumps in every now and then and starts singing along as a kind of guidepost that the kid looks to for reference. It's not correction in the colloquial sense, but it is a form of feedback. The 4-year-old always has the correct version played by his father and elder siblings to contrast and compare with his own playing. It's the same with language. Like, if a young child says, "We go to the zoo," and the adult replies, "Oh, you went to the zoo? Did you see any zebras?" There's feedback there. The adult doesn't have to say explicitly, "No, it's not goed, it's went." The contrast between what the child said and what the adult responded is enough to create a contrast that the child can learn from. But obviously, this kind of feedback only works if the child is surrounded by proficient speakers. In Music as a Language, Wooten says, quote, "The majority of the people you spoke to were not beginners. They were proficient speakers. Imagine your parents forcing you to only speak to other babies till you were good enough to speak to them. You'd probably be an adult before you could carry out a proper conversation. To use a musical term, as a baby, you were allowed to jam with professionals. Connected to this, he gives the following piece of advice. Quote, allow young musicians to play and perform with accomplished musicians on a daily basis. There are two parts to this. First, the others are more proficient than you. The 4-year-old in the Joby Joba video gets to play with his older siblings and his father, all of whom are a lot more proficient than he is. And second, you're meant to do this daily. As Wooten says, quote, learning to speak was not something you were sent somewhere to do only a few times a week. In the truest sense of the term, you were immersed in the language. It was everywhere around you. If a child is passionate about music, they won't just go to class once a week. They'll be listening to music a lot on their own time, jamming with friends, practicing at home, and a bunch of other things. It becomes a big part of their life, not by design, but organically. They enjoy music and naturally want to do more of it. In other words, it becomes a lifestyle. It's the same with language learning. If you had mandatory language classes in high school, the kid who got good probably wasn't the one who just paid attention in class and did all their homework. On its own, that's just not enough. The kid who got good was probably doing a lot of other stuff on their own time. Reading books and watching TV shows in the language, finding native speakers to try and talk to, and so on. Granted, there's some additional hurdles when you're an adult trying to learn a foreign language. The kid in the Joby Joba video has everything he needs right there. Plus, he doesn't have the kind of responsibilities an adult has. And people's expectations just aren't the same for a 4-year-old as they are for an adult. All of that can affect just how much you can or even just want to approach language learning that way. But nonetheless, whatever those limitations happen to be, it's probably good advice to surround yourself with a language as spoken by proficient native speakers to whichever extent is possible for you. In Music as a Language, Wooten offers one last piece of advice which encapsulates pretty much everything else. Quote, encourage young musicians to play more than they practice. The more they play, the more they'll practice on their own. Earlier when we talked about embracing mistakes, some people might have objected to that. They might have thought, well, actually my parents did correct me. And the truth is, there's a lot of variation out there in how we raise our children. It varies across cultures, across social and economic groups, and across individual families. So it may very well be the case that they were raised with a hefty dose of explicit correction. But the point Wooten is making isn't to pit play against practice. He's not saying one works and the other doesn't. What he's saying is that we should prioritize play over practice. That if we do that, practice will naturally arise as a result of play. The more you play, the more you'll want to practice on your own. In some ways, what Wooten is proposing is pretty similar to the CI methods we mentioned earlier. For example, in an interview for the channel Playback, Wooten says,
do you have to know nouns and verbs and pronouns and participles to use them? No. You learn to use them first. And then you learn what you're doing after. Music has you learn what to do before you're doing it.
Yeah.
Backwards.
That's something you might hear almost word for word from proponents of CI methods. It's a big part of what they're trying to capture with the baby analogy. A baby learns a language intuitively before it learns any formal grammar rules. A useful distinction in language acquisition research is the distinction between implicit knowledge and explicit knowledge. Implicit knowledge is something that you know intuitively, subconsciously. Explicit knowledge is something you know consciously. A baby will develop the implicit knowledge of a language, but not necessarily the explicit knowledge. For example, if your native language is English and I say, that's a red beautiful guitar, something probably feels off. You might not be able to cite the rule for the order of adjectives, but you know something doesn't feel right. You know that it should be, that's a beautiful red guitar, and not, that's a red beautiful guitar. You have the implicit knowledge, but not the explicit knowledge. But just as a musician doesn't have to know music theory to play music, a speaker doesn't have to know grammar to speak a language. So on that front, Wooten and the CI crowd are very much in agreement. They prioritize implicit knowledge over explicit knowledge. And yet, the way they approach learning is still very different. So what's the difference? This is probably the most important part. I mean, the practical advice so far is just to embrace mistakes, to engage with proficient speakers every day, and to prioritize play over practice. That's all well and good, but it's probably things you've heard a million times before. It's nothing to write home about. What really separates Wooten's approach from the CI approaches we've mentioned is what they choose to focus on and how they view the relationship between the learner and the thing they're trying to learn. Let me explain. For the most part, CI methods tend to focus on the language itself as the end goal. Language is a skill or a system that is separate from the student and that he or she has to master. They just want to get the student from point A to point B. There's not really any room to take the student's own voice into account and to consider how the student can mold the language for themselves. What it means to master language is essentially the same thing for every student. For Wooten, on the other hand, the end goal isn't just mastering a skill. The end goal is for the student to grow as a person through the medium of music. And that changes, well, everything really. For him, learning music isn't just about learning how to play an instrument. It's about experience, it's about freedom, it is about identity. That's where the baby analogy comes in. In his view, our childlike authenticity often gets beaten out of us as we grow older, go to school, to work, and so on. His role as a teacher isn't just to help us master a skill, it's to help us recapture our natural, authentic selves, who we were before social pressure and norms warped us into something else. This is also rooted in his experience as a person of color in the 20th century in the US. It recalls how his parents stressed the importance of defining their own identity and not letting others do it for them.
Our parents knew that if we didn't know who we are, if we don't know, then the world might tell us. And they weren't telling us the truth back then. Not at all.
That change in focus makes a big difference. From an approach centered around the skill to be mastered, we move towards an approach centered around the student. Wooten's approach gives primacy to the student, who they are, what they want to do, experience, and say. With the CI methods we've been using as a foil, that doesn't really factor in. With those methods, mastery means essentially the same thing for everyone. But with Wooten's approach, mastery will mean something different for each and every student. Success is no longer about whether or not you can speak, say, Japanese fluently. It's about whether or not the way you speak Japanese is authentically your way of speaking the language. From Wooten's perspective, there's not really much point in producing more proficient musicians or speakers of a language if they're just carbon copies of one another. After all, if there's nothing unique about them, what does the world need with yet another proficient speaker of Japanese? What we bring to the table as learners is, well, us. We're all individuals. We're all different. Just as we value musicians for their ability to play or sing in their own unique voice, so too with language. So, instead of yet another third party dictating who you are and what success must mean for you, Wooten empowers the student to answer those questions for themselves and recapture their own authentic voice. Learning becomes not just a path towards mastering a skill, but a path towards emancipation. Whether or not we should try and learn like a baby is of course debatable. After all, we're not babies. For some things, this means that learning like a baby will be impossible. For example, when a baby is born, it can discriminate between all of the sounds in all of the languages out there. When it learns the sounds of its native language, it's not really learning anything new per se. Really what it's doing is getting rid of the stuff it doesn't need. All the sounds that aren't used in its native language, there's no need for the baby to be able to discriminate those sounds, and gradually it'll lose that ability. It'll just keep the sounds of its native language and get rid of the rest. For us adults, though, it's the other way around. We've already ditched the ability to discriminate the sounds other than the ones used in our native language. So when we learn a foreign language, we have to build up that ability from scratch. It's a very different process. That's just one example, but the point is, when we use the baby analogy, it can only ever be an approximation. We can't learn exactly like a baby does. but nonetheless we can still use it as an analogy and take the bits and pieces we find useful. For some, what they take from the analogy is that we should listen a lot and not worry about studying grammar. For others, like Wooten, it'll also mean that we should try and recapture the authenticity and freedom we had as young children. If we adopt Wooten's perspective, what we take away from the analogy is that a baby doesn't just observe the new world that opens up before it. It interacts with the world, prods and tests things out, plays and has fun with it. Long before it utters its first words, it will babble. It doesn't wait to internalize the language it hears, and it certainly doesn't fear making mistakes. What Wooten is telling us is that if we want to learn like a baby, we shouldn't focus too much on the do's and don'ts, we shouldn't be afraid of getting things wrong, and instead, we should embrace our own imperfect selves. To learn like a baby isn't to cut ourselves off from the world and only watch it through a computer screen. To learn like a baby is to boldly step out into the unknown. Just like a 4-year-old belting out the chorus too early, to learn like a baby or a young child is to give ourselves permission to be not just wrong, but confidently wrong and shamelessly free.
Give God the